Thank you, Beth. It's great to be here today. I appreciate everybody's joining us for this session. Before we dive in, I just wanted to check by show of hands, how many people here know CloudFlare? You can just hold up your hands. Okay.
2.
3, 4. It's one of the best kept secrets on the internet. Learned a lot about CloudFlare when I joined Authy, and what Matt and his team have accomplished is quite impressive. So, Matt, if you could just tell us a little bit about CloudFlare, the network you guys have created.
Sure. It's actually not discouraging to me that so few people know about us. When we're doing our job, right, a lot actually like Twilio, we just sort of blend into the background. So our mission at CloudFlare is to help build a better internet. Everyone in this room has used our network probably hundreds of times in the last 24 hours without knowing it. And what we do is for anyone who's putting content online, whether that's through a traditional website, web application, mobile application, that content then sits behind our network, and we're able to both protect it from different types of attacks, ranging from hacking attempts to denial of service attacks to otherwise, and then also do things to make it perform significantly better. So if you've visited the New York Times, you've used CloudFlare. If you've hailed a cab on or hailed a car on Uber, you've used CloudFlare. If you've posted a post on Reddit, you've used CloudFlare. We have over 2 million customers that range from tiny individual blogs to the United States government and Goldman Sachs and literally everything in between, and are growing very quickly. So about 5,000 new customers sign up for us every single day. The vast majority of those customers are relatively unsophisticated, may not really have a ton of sophistication that on how to get the most out of whatever they're doing online. Some of them are extremely sophisticated. Again, big, large enterprises use us. And so as we've had to build the service, we wanted to build something that essentially democratized the resources that previously only companies like Google had. So we run data centers all around the world. We're turning up a new facility a week throughout 2015. We have an eighth of a blue whale worth of servers, or 1/4 the loading capacity of a 747, which is actually kind of an interesting cocktail party trivia stat, which is that a 747 couldn't carry a blue whale. But that's all in flight right now of just new equipment that we're deploying all around the world. The next facility we're turning up is in Doha, Qatar, which I didn't ever think that I'd be running a data center in Doha, Qatar, but and again, just a facility a week, which is pretty amazing. And then through that, we're able to again provide all of our customers resources that again you used to have to be someone like Google or Facebook to have, and we've made that then very accessible. And we've been really very close with the Twilio team for a long time. Consider Jeff a friend. And a lot of what Twilio is doing, where theoretically there are a lot of these things that you could try and roll yourself, CloudFlare is doing as well. Theoretically, you could go try to build data centers all around the world. You could try and build that out, but the reality is that specializing in doing that really well is core to what we do at CloudFlare, and again really aligns with what Twilio is doing. So.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's really impressive what you have accomplished and the kinds of services that you provide your customers. And one of the things that Authy and Twilio have gotten from working with CloudFlare is peace of mind, because you are protecting us at a very fundamental level, meaning that you guys are seeing more of the threats than we are.
Yeah.
And you're taking care of them for us.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So in any second, we see about 10 million requests flow through our network, and we're able to see either the good requests or the bad requests and build a profile on data on that. It's about 1.8 billion people that pass through our network every single month. And as a result of that, it acts almost like a neighborhood watch, where if an attack happens against one particular customer, that data is automatically shared across all of the other customers. The slightly not safe for work or conference story that I can tell is when we were first starting CloudFlare back in 2011, We'd launched and customers were signing up. We used to have a bell in the office that would go off whenever a new customer signed up. And I remember really clearly the bell went off. We all ran back to our computer. And it was the moment in time I thought, wow, we need an employee handbook. Because what it was of all the crazy things, a Turkish escort site. So a site advertising essentially prostitutes in Turkey. And the first thought was like, how'd they even hear about us? And what was crazy was over the course of the next 2 weeks, 150 Turkish escort sites signed up for CloudFlare. And we thought, what's going on? And we finally got one of the web administrators on a Skype call. And we said, why did you sign up? And he said, so excited to hear about you. You've solved a major problem for us. You may not know this about Turkey, but Turkey is a very complicated country. As you move further west in the country, it's very European, and they don't like what it is that we do, but they tolerate it. They don't, throw us in jail forever and ever. But as you go further east, as you get off near the border of, Iran and Iraq, it becomes a much more conservative country, and there are conservative Muslim populations there that think that we are the epitome of everything which is wrong with the modern Muslim world. And so when they're bored, they launch these denial of service attacks to knock us offline. One of our friends, reads TechCrunch, read about you guys, signed up. Suddenly we were able to withstand these attacks. By the way, there's not all that much money in Turkish escorts, so we're not going to pay you anything. We're just using the free version of your service. But do you mind? And we're like, no, okay, that's fine. And so over the course of the next year, we saw the attacks just get bigger and bigger and more sophisticated. But the system just kept learning about what was going on with those attacks. And almost exactly a year later, right about now, actually, in 2012, we got a frantic phone call from Azerbaijan on one Thursday night. It was the first thing in the morning in Azerbaijan, and it was a Dutch gentleman who was calling, and he said, "You have to help. The contest, the finals of the contest are this weekend, and the site's offline." And we're like, "What contest?" And he's like, "The Eurovision contest." And we're just a bunch of dumb Americans. I have no idea what Eurovision is. Turns out it is the largest non-sporting event in the world. It's American Idol with nationalism. And it's always hosted in the country that won the year before. And so it was being hosted in Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan, if you look at a map, is right kind of nestled up against eastern Turkey and Iran. And there was, the finals had 6 contestants. One of the contestants happened to be gay. A conservative group in the region thought that this was an affront to the country. And so they actually issued a press release saying, we're going to knock Eurovision off the internet. Signed up for CloudFlare. It takes about 5 minutes to sign up for CloudFlare. Instantly, the site came back online. And for better or worse, we saved Eurovision. And then if you fast forward 6 months after that, I get a frantic phone call on a Saturday from a banker, CISO of a major retail bank in New York. And he said, we need you and the best salespeople to be in our office first thing on Monday morning. And my first thought was, well, we don't have salespeople, so that'll be interesting. But we actually bought Shri Rao, who was one of our senior operations guys, a suit, because we didn't want him showing up in his usual cargo shorts, and we all flew to New York. And what the New York Times has subsequently reported, and what we learned that morning, was that a group of hackers that were in far western Iran had launched a series of attacks against all of the U.S. retail operations, one after another after another. And I remember that we walked in the first conference room, and they slid the piece of paper across the room, and with the logs of the attacks that they were seeing. And Shri said, "Oh, we know these guys. These are the same guys that attacked Eurovision, which are the same guys that attacked the Turkish escorts." And so, as a result, that's why Goldman Sachs and a whole bunch of large financial institutions now use us. It's because, it started out by how can we actually get smarter with every single request that flows through us, even if those requests are going to something like Turkish escorts. So,
I love how the evolution of your business moved along, but more importantly, your knowledge of the kinds of threats that are out there continually expanded, and that makes it a better and more secure service. So how did that experience result in you adding two-factor authentication to CloudFlare?
Well, because we end up being in front of so much traffic, we are first of all internally very much a target, and so we're a security company, and if somebody compromises our security, they can do pretty awful things, and people are always trying to compromise the security. I personally was a target of such an attack where a particularly determined 15-year-old kid based in Long Beach, California, who went by the hacker name Cosmo, bought my social security number off of a Russian website, used that to convince AT&T to redirect my cell phone's voicemail to an account that he controlled, then initiated a password or an account recovery process with Google's, on my personal Gmail account with Google. It's my personal Gmail account, so who cares if someone gets into it, I thought. We use Google Apps to manage our corporate email account, and we had two-factor authentication, all the security in place, but there was actually a flaw in how Google had implemented two-factor authentication, where once the hacker had controlled my personal email account, they were able to get into the corporate email account. And from there, they were actually able to access one of our control panels where they were able to redirect one of the sites. And they could have redirected, FBI.gov or the Central Bank of Brazil or the Internal Revenue Service of Pakistan, all of which are CloudFlare customers. Instead, this particular kid decided to redirect 4chan, which was a sort of a surprise. When I actually called Chris Poole to apologize, it was about a minute and 30 seconds that the site was actually redirected. I called Chris Poole to apologize, and the first thing he said to me was like, "I'm so sorry," which I was like, "No, I'm supposed to be apologizing to you." But what that really taught us, and that experience, and that was 2011, was that was the worst of all possible outcomes. That thankfully didn't have that bad of an outcome, and that we really understood that we are constantly a target and that we have to take security very seriously. And then we also understood that we had to then make that something which was part of all of our customers. And so we spent a long time really trying to evaluate what the best solutions were for two-factor authentication. I talked to Twilio back at the time, and they were sending text messages back and forth, and we thought, that makes sense, but that's actually still, if someone's going to go and redirect your cell phone, like I'm worried that somehow they can intercept that text message. Looked at like Google Authenticator, looked at kind of rolling our own solution, and that's where we came across Authy, and really resonated with the team early on. Thought, gosh, this is something we could either build ourselves or we could actually go to people who are focused on doing it and really building it from the beginning. And so we started with our own internal tools and our own internal systems, our VPNs and access to our control panels, and really built Authy into that first. And then once we were happy with it and really happy with the team, we rolled that out to all of our customers. And it's been actually a really great experience working with Authy, and now most CloudFlare customers are also Authy users as well. So.
I know it's been excellent. Actually, many times I'll go into a customer meeting, and the first question I'll ask is, who here knows Authy? And inevitably, especially when you've got a group of IT people, somebody will raise their hand, and easily half the time they're a CloudFlare user using Authy to be able to access their CloudFlare account. So it's been a great partnership in that respect. So being early with Authy, I bet there's some lessons learned that you might be able to share with the folks here that are potentially considering adding two-factor authentication to their sites.
Well, the first thing is that things like two-factor authentication and login systems and credentialing. This is not usually what engineers get super excited at Cloudflare to build. These are really important things, but they're often it's like the billing system. No one wants to build the billing system, even though it's absolutely critical. And so, I think the first thing a couple of things that we had that were reactions. So one was when we looked out and surveyed alternatives. A lot of those alternatives were sort of projects that had been built for a little while and then basically abandoned. So when we looked at Google Authenticator, which a lot of our customers were like, why can't you just use that? When we talked to the Google team and especially after a flaw in their system allowed our company to be compromised. We have very strong relationships with the Google team. There just was an investment in that, and so we were concerned that was something that if we really built it in, that it might, if there was ever a flaw, if there was ever a problem, that there wasn't a team that was really there to support it. The other piece was that a lot of the other solutions that we had didn't support. They either were too hard for kind of the average bobsblog.com that signs up for us, or they were too simple for large enterprise customers. And what we needed to be able to do was not only just support two-factor authentication, but really support a very advanced and customizable multi-user approach to how we were going to roll CloudFlare out. We had to do something that would satisfy the federal government or Goldman Sachs. And so I think that as we've watched the Authy platform expand, and one of the things I really like about it is, even if I use it now with all my Google accounts, because that can all just get managed from that same place, and it's really great. And then from a customer support standpoint, it's really tough. One of the things that we often will have happen is that people who are trying to abuse our customers will try and use either our support or our abuse process in order to get access to it, essentially socially engineering access. And so some of the features around Authy, where customers can actually go back and recover their keys, which other two-factor authentication systems just don't support, has made it so that it ends up creating much less of a customer service burden on us. And as a result of that, it's made it less likely that customer support or abuse can be used as a vector to get around what are the otherwise security concerns. So I think that the lesson here was that in spite of the fact that a lot of customers were trying to push us to say, why can't you just use Google? We tried to make a really rational decision, and as a result of that, I think a lot of customers are actually pretty happy, and it's actually decreased the load on our own systems. So.
That's interesting. I was very familiar with the support benefit. That's something that we worked on with a very focused effort, and a lot of feedback from your team as well. I hadn't thought about that fact that you could socially engineer the support desk to actually provide you with a reset.
Yeah, and you think about it, that's if whatever your login system is overly brittle, and someone's like, I need to get into this account, at some point you make a rational decision to provide some way around that. And now all of a sudden you've compromised what is essentially the purpose of the security system, and you've focused all the attackers on that particular vector to try and get around it. And every minute of every day there's some attacker, be it again a 15-year-old kid, or one of the crazy things if you're a CloudFlare employee is one of the warnings that most people don't see when they use Google Apps is that there's a red bar which can appear across the top of it, which will say, it appears you have been a target of state-sponsored phishing. And when that shows up the first day, it definitely makes an impression on people. And again, we end up protecting things like Chechen news publications and the Hong Kong democracy movement and others that very large, very sophisticated governments aren't necessarily happy about it with us, and Authy ends up, inevitably somebody clicks on the wrong email or their laptop gets infected, and it's great to have the peace of mind that we've got a strong two-factor authentication layer in front of all of the critical systems at CloudFlare that just gives you an additional peace of mind and makes you worry a little bit less about someone new clicking on a link and getting access to the whole network.
Yeah, the more that you can actually automate the entire system, lock out the opportunity for somebody to somehow or another exploit a human-involved interaction, totally makes sense. Better security. We've got about 5 more minutes. I thought I'd pause for a moment and see if there were any questions from the audience that Matthew could answer and share his experiences. Anybody?
See, this is that two-factor authentication, not all that sexy. Important, but nobody has any questions. That's,
Two-factor authentication is sexy.
no.
In the back?
I got one question, just kind of tangential, but like security becoming obviously more and more important as applications and everything we make. Being both a provider and a target of hacks, like where's your view on where's the accountability of hacks lie? At the corporate level, down to like individual programmer who wrote the logging form that did with two-factor.
Yeah. So, I mean, humans make mistakes, and you know, everyone on our support team at some point has gotten tricked into clicking on a link they probably shouldn't have, and we do things to try and make that the case. But I think that what I worry about if you say, you know, if you're a developer and you made a mistake that causes a breach, and you're fired because of that or you're disciplined because of that, what I worry about is it makes it less likely for internally people to report those breaches. So for example, we did some there's a whole series of mistakes that happened from AT&T to Google to us that led to our particular compromise. One of the things that we learned in that process was that being just radically transparent about it was the right instinct. It was the right thing to do. The temptation when something like that happens is to be an ostrich and hide your head in the ground. What we did instead was, I remember a minute, like, you know, first phone call was to the customer who was affected. Second phone calls to the lawyer to say, you know, what's the potential risk. Third phone calls to all our board members to let them know what happened. And then as soon as I got off that phone call, I ran straight to one of our graphic designers, and I said, you have to stop what you're doing and build an infographic on how stupid we were, right? And lay it out. And so within 30 minutes of us getting essentially it all cleaned up, we had a very informative blog post out there that explained, here's exactly what happened. You know, people asked, did we lose any customers that day? And the answer is, not only did we not lose any customers, but it was one of our biggest sign-up days because, you know, we're fundamentally in the business of trust. That's not everyone's approach. We have a competitor out there that was breached by the Syrian Electronic Army this last week, and they didn't even return press calls about, you know, whether or not it happened. I just know, I'm not even worried about them because I know that that's not the way you build trust over time. And so people do stupid things, companies do stupid things, they make mistakes. What you really want are people going to own up to those mistakes, learn from them, and not make the same mistake multiple times. And so, you know, again, we try to build CloudFlare in such a way that we learn from every attack, and we then try to build the organization in such a way that we really encourage people to say, hey, we made this mistake, let's not do it again. And I would worry about, again, pointing fingers and saying, Ed wrote the wrong piece of code, because I think that discourages Ed from reporting it in the future. I don't think we have an Ed at CloudFlare, and if we did, I'm sure he's brilliant. So,
As a matter of fact, if you don't already read CloudFlare's blog, add it to your list, because the details of their experiences are fully exposed. And I was turned on to it by the founder of Authy, Daniel Palacio, and I've learned more from what CloudFlare shares with the market than what you find in the typical publications that are out there, because it's real and it's current.
Yeah, and actually another lesson, which is again tangential, has been that when we start, if you go back and read the very first blog posts, it was like, this is why internet performance is really important and you should care about it, and wow, security is important and you should care about it. And it just, I mean, we sounded like idiots. At some point, someone there was, and I think I don't know exactly when the turning point was, but at some point, one of our network engineers noticed that there had been a route leak on the internet that had taken Google offline for about 15% of the internet for about 30 minutes. And he called the provider and got it fixed. And we wrote a blog post about, like, here's what a route leak is, and here's how BGP works, and here's why Google went offline, and here's what we did to fix it. And it was really different than what we would typically do, but the response was just massive. And people were like, oh my gosh, I learned something. And around that time, we switched the focus where we started to think that the audience for the blog wasn't customers. The audience for the blog was developers that we were trying to recruit to come work for us. What we didn't realize, and I think we've only started to come to realize now, is a lot of people say that we're a sort of B2B company. I actually think that we and Authy and Twilio really are all B2D companies. We're business to developer companies. And one of the things which is amazing about Cloudflare and our experience at Cloudflare is that because we have provided a free service, whenever we get on, I was just on a call with Bank of America, and there'll be a multi-million-dollar account for us potentially, and every one of the people who would actually be implementing the system had been a Cloudflare user before on their personal blogs, and so they knew us, they knew what our capabilities were, they knew what was strengths and weaknesses, and they were like, I've always wanted to see what happens if we just sign up for your enterprise service and what the additional bells and whistles are. And so doing things that really, the world of the future is much more going to be sold to the people who are the actual developers, you folks in the room who are going to be pulling that into your companies. And when we compete with other more traditional security companies that are selling what ends up being shelfware that they sold to the CISO because they went to RSA, that just it never actually gets implemented. More and more the world is going to be run by you all, and so more and more we want to make sure that we're not only with the product but then also with things like the blog. We're telling you things that are interesting, not just boring marketing crap.
It's a great line to end on. One more question back there.
It's really hard for me to say what the pattern is at some level because we've gotten to a scale now where we've started to actually move the market in attacks. So for a while, just focusing on denial of service attacks, which is, if you don't know, it's just basically, it's the simplest of all types of attacks. It's trying to flood you with enough traffic one way or another that overwhelms your resources. So when those first started coming out, people would generate really large volume denial of service attacks that would be hundreds of gigs of traffic. So the largest ones that we see now, we saw one this morning that was up over 400 gigabits per second of traffic coming to hit our network. And that was a problem for us at first because we didn't have 400 gigs. Now we've got many, many, many terabits of capacity, and so those are actually relatively easy attacks. And so the attackers have literally shifted where now we've gone through a whole bunch of iterations, and now the attacks that we're seeing are these large-scale DNS requests where they're sending just a whole bunch of valid DNS queries, and they're indistinguishable from invalid DNS queries. They may not be as high volume in terms of the bandwidth, but your DNS application then has to be able to respond to it. If you're trying to run your own DNS application today, you're just dead. There's no way you can do it. Whereas we've built a system that can respond to hundreds of millions of DNS queries per second if that ends up hitting our network, and we've seen it in some instances. And so as we've gotten better with that, now they're shifting again. Where recently we've seen attacks that are focused on another weakness of our system, and now we're strengthening that up. And so there is a bit of an arms race that's out there, and I like our odds in it. What worries me is that it's getting really difficult to run content on the internet, even if you're a big sophisticated company like Goldman Sachs, without having some sort of protection like Cloudflare that's out there. And while that's great for our business, I worry about it for the future of the internet, that there really are going to end up being probably a relatively small number of networks that provide the security and performance services that you need, and almost everyone is going to seek shelter behind one or the other of them. And so, we think it's incumbent on us to make sure that even unsophisticated users, even people that don't have budgets, even customers that have really big problems but don't have the ability to pay us, that we can provide that attack and protection, because the alternative is Facebook runs the internet or something like that, which again I don't think is a really good outcome for the internet. But the problems are getting big enough that it's challenging for almost any organization to be able to deal with those. And again, I think that goes back to a lot of what Jeff has talked about, how trying to solve the telephony problem yourself, theoretically you could do it, but Twilio's the expert. Trying to solve two-factor authentication yourself, theoretically you could do it, but Authy's really the expert. Trying to solve some of these large-scale security attacks yourself, theoretically maybe you can do it, but we've just got a lot more data and ability to deal with that. And so I think that's part of, even though we're not particularly good marketers, that's solving real problems is part of what's really driven attacks to us. And so we see almost everything. And so it's hard to say exactly what the pattern is, except that there are a lot of bad guys out there, and they're going to find any vulnerability they can to get access to you. So.
I'm going to actually cut you guys off here because we are running really behind, and I definitely want to make sure we have time to hear from our last two speakers and get everyone out of here by 3:30 or just shortly thereafter. So thank you both. Matt, if you're going to be around, people maybe can talk to you offline. And for this session, please send feedback. It's at T76.